Hello, everybody. Welcome back for another episode here at What's Spinnin at 45 Drives. Today, we've got a really, really exciting one. We're joined by James King, who is with the Toronto International Film Festival, and we're going to talk about the storage infrastructure and kind of the technical behind the scenes of how they run the massive, successful film festival that they have out in Toronto. So, without further ado, thank you so much for coming on. James, welcome.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So before we dive into the kind of fun stuff while we're here, why don't you tell the folks just a little bit about yourself, how you ended up at TIFF, what you do there, and then just
Sure. Yeah.
kind of riff from there.
My role is I'm the senior technical manager for the TIFF Lightbox, which is the headquarters of the Toronto International Film Festival. I also have a fairly significant role in the technical deployment and the builds for the festival itself, because we utilize our 6-screen venue that we have at King and John in downtown Toronto, but we also take over numerous other venues to branch out to accommodate the size of the festival every year. So I have a very heavy hand in that as well. I'm a cinema technician by trade. So I was a projectionist for more than 20 years, still a cinema technician primarily, because that's what we do. We're showing movies. I started off as a English major at the University of Toronto, really. But there was a film program, and in the film program, I was curious about booth operations, needed a part-time job, and kind of fell in it from there. When I was a kid, I was building computers from a very early age, though, so that sort of was a good start to kind of get into that sort of.
That's a classic sign you're going to end up there.
Exactly, yeah. So, getting into the film sort of gig, it's unique in the sense that there's really not a lot of cinema technicians out there, right? So we're focusing on sort of exhibition and building cinemas and essentially calibrating them, doing all that kind of stuff. So it was an interesting thing to fall into after sort of like a post-university job, and quickly got in with the film festival doing film inspections. So again, before digital took over, everything was still analog, so 35 millimeter film, and primarily my responsibility was inspecting and assembling film prints, right? Hundreds and hundreds of film prints for the festival with a collection of other people. So it was an interesting beginning to get to that before sort of the digital encroached and sort of took over. From there, it's been with the festival now for I guess I would say 20 years in different capacities as a technician. I worked as a technical manager or director for other film festivals around the world, mainly in the Middle East and Abu Dhabi and Egypt for a while. So it's interesting because like I said, there's not a lot of people that sort of do that role. So it's a very small, close-knit community of cinema exhibition technicians, I guess you want to call it, right? So responsible for managing festivals of that size. So and then they opened the building, TIFF Lightbox, down at King and John in 2010, and that was basically engineered to be sort of the museum or the Palace of Film exhibition. So it's and I've been managing the tech from that end ever since. So it's been an interesting journey as far as sort of what areas I've had to technically manage over the years that have certainly branched out much further than 35 millimeter film, which is again something I'm still working at, and I know we still run a lot of that, but moving into more of a digital management. It's almost full circle, because again, I was building computers when I was 11, so I kind of had to go back to doing a lot of PC builds and sort of going back into that world from an exhibition point of view. So that's sort of it in a nutshell. So
that's awesome. Oh, that's really interesting. I never really considered the logistical challenges of a film festival until last year. We hosted, we do something every year called the Creator Summit. We bring people, long story short, we did it down in Wilmington, North Carolina, where we've got another office. And there's a Cucalores Film Festival that they have down there. So that was my first, someone came and spoke about their experiences in that. And I just kind of was like, wow, they've got some unique challenges, yeah. Anyway, so it's fun to talk about that today. So let's get into that. I got a couple questions about dealing with the scale and everything. So You guys screen hundreds of films over 10 days, bunch.
Mhm.
Can you paint a picture of what the like kind of IT infrastructure looks like during the festival season to like maintain all that versus the rest of the year? Is it a completely different animal? Is it always ongoing? Anyway.
It's a different animal, yeah. I mean, and one of the interesting things is that from an IT point of view, we do have an IT department at TIFF that obviously manages the year-round IT and all the logistical challenges for IT for
Okay.
festival deployment. Because the festival, from a screening point of view, we obviously do a ton of screenings, and there's all the logistical challenges that, but there's also box office logistics, industry logistics, all these other sort of tangents that that the festival utilizes. So we have a department for that. But what's unique is that when it comes to the cinema exhibition side, that usually resides mostly within the tech realm, right? So tech now, AV tech or cinema exhibition tech is very much an IT endeavor, whether people want to sort of admit that or not, right? So it's one of those things where, from my end of things, the the challenge that sort of percolated in the last, I would say, 6 years was storage management and how content can be sort of downloaded, managed, retained, and then deployed. Because the one thing to sort of bear in mind is, we have usually around 450 plus films for the festival over the course of 11 days over arguably, I think, about 26, 27 screens. So and then in addition to that, we have private screenings, we have industry screenings, so you're talking about thousands of
Yeah.
screenings, right? Like the scale is quite enormous. And the biggest challenge really, moving over to sort of the digital age of things, is that we needed a way to, you sort of acquire the films, which a 2K to 4K film, a 2K film is probably going to average anywhere from probably 120 to 180 gigs
Yeah.
per title. 4Ks could be, up to 250 plus gigs. So they vary based on sort of the industry standards. But, when you scale it up to that size and factor in the fact that, with a lot of the bigger titles we get in, we're not going to get one version of the film necessarily. We might have multiple edits and cuts because we're doing world premieres. So you're talking about multiple versions. So a lot of the storage management, the deployment became sort of a pretty big logistical challenge, and a lot of the networking needs and the PC infrastructure for our home base plus sort of the remote sites became that much more critical. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but
Oh
that's
no,
sort of
it
like
did because I
sort of
just
the,
kind
the
of wanted to open
starting
it up.
point.
I wanted to
Yeah.
open up a little bit to that, and it was a perfect segue because that's where I'm going next. So
Okay.
with that storage and networking, in such an era, I find the whole centralized or put it on a flash drive, send it off somewhere, the old sneaker net
Yeah.
way. Like,
Yep.
what do you guys do for your storage management then? Why don't we just dive right into that? Like, is it
Yeah.
centralized? How do you share? Take me through
It's
it.
it's kind of a hybrid, and there's been different iterations explored over the years. So like we still actually get a lot of physical drives,
Yep.
right, delivered, and then those would need to be ingested onto what we call the library management system or an LMS, and that would retain a lot of the films before they get deployed. Now, the way we do it right now is for the multi-screen venues, we would typically have a centralized server or a centralized repository that a lot of the content and the films would get loaded, and then they get deployed to the local playout servers
Okay.
directly. So for example, we take over a multiplex up the street that has 14 screens, and you can load it onto the library server and then deploy it over the network and then ingest it from there. Same thing at our headquarters of the Lightbox, 6 screens. Well, actually, we go to 7 because we take over and build another one. And so that same sort of management takes place. There is a bit of sneaker net still involved, though, with last minute deliveries and stuff like that you might need to run up physically to the cinema to load up stuff there. But the idea is that to try to centralize it as much as possible, because one of the critical things when it comes to the format, and then the format is DCP.
Yeah.
It's a digital cinema package, is what the industry is, or standard is. And so one of the critical things about that is sort of a validation
Yep.
process on the content. So unlike just getting an MP4 file or an MOV or some ProRes thing that someone might deliver, DCP inherently would have a sort of a hash verification on ingest to know that everything is there. Because if everything's not there, we're talking even by a few kilobytes, then it will not ingest, it will not play, it will get errors. So, the initial ingest period to the servers, which have a software running that does that sort of validation period, is really critical before we get to sort of the deployment stage. With the single venues, sort of large gala venues, we have a library server at each venue. And so, and I have remote access. So certain things can be uploaded remotely, but we haven't got to the point of doing full feature films yet. So typically the films would be physically delivered, sneakernet, and then ingested on the library server for two very important reasons. One, the sheer volume of the films. Two, redundancy, because the two big factors you have to account for on the playout server, which is literally let's call it a very beefy GPU inside the projector. And so for the playout server, if anything would happen from, if content would unfortunately be corrupt, or like say someone accidentally deletes a version of the film or anything to account for, you need that sort of immediate redundancy to punt it up.
The show must go on.
So, yeah, the show must go on. And I think that's honestly the most critical part of it, is that there's no time, there's no downtime, right? Like, and if you think of like a one-off screening or a one-off event where something goes wrong, maybe you can kind of reschedule, you can go through. You're doing that many screenings a day.
Yeah, the domino effect would just ruin everything.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I've seen it happen in other instances with technical issues. It's like, yeah, you just can't account for any downtime. So having that sort of that measure of redundancy. We have explored and haven't gone down that road yet, more centralized deployment, and then using fiber in order to deploy to some of the larger venues. And so that would again be more of a centralized, upload of all the films, whether they're downloaded directly from a lab or distributor, or physically ingested and then sort of like deployed from there. I haven't gone down that road, but there's certainly been strong explorations of that sort of system, which I'd be interested to see moving forward, because I think it's probably going there anyway, to be honest. So, yeah.
Nice. Thank you. Great answer. Which, and then my other question is, you were saying that's redundancy and all that, but what about security, right? Because like film festivals, especially big film festivals, like you guys are maybe showing stuff that everyone hasn't seen yet. So like, I imagine the digital world makes that a little difficult too, because you got to make sure your access control is set up properly and no one pilfers anything from you.
Yeah, I mean, the access control thing, and that works with our IT team. So we do have, a very, I would say, robust VLAN infrastructure and security infrastructure in the building itself to prevent anyone from accessing the servers that would be able to reachable for playout. And so, and a lot of that is, I mean, there's some air gapping of some VLANs, and there's certain other sort of structures in place to sort of keep the that sort of process at bay. I mean, one thing to note is that with the DCP format, there's an encryption scheme that's used with playout. So one of the really big challenges, and actually we have a 4-person team just for the festival, is what's called a KDM management or key deployment message. And it's basically all that is, it's an XML file that's issued by the lab that unlocks the specific film, the actual film on the drive, and it matches it with the playout server and allows a window for playout. So, one of the things is that, people ask, what if someone is able to just download the film? It's like, there's no way to play it.
Garbled bits.
It's basically useless. And so, the management, and we're talking about thousands of screens, the management of quite literally thousands and thousands of keys to unlock all of the films across all of the playout servers is also an enormous task. But we utilize the same servers for that. So one of the actual interesting processes we take on that end is we have a centralized system where keys would come in and then get automatically deployed over a network essentially I built out for the festival that goes to the playout servers and can unlock them. And then we are able to check in real time the validity of that key and then sort of go from there. So it's a quick deployment and automated process that does require still humans to validate to make sure everything's okay. But it's another layer of sort of like the security and the measures just to make sure everything is working properly. But I mean, very, very rarely would we get what's called an unencrypted film or like a video version, I would say, like a non-DCP version of a film for the festival. You may get some stuff really early on when we're doing sort of preview screenings and stuff, but you wouldn't get anything like that. And so Studios are very sort of aware and adept on that, and the standard essentially prevents that sort of thing from happening, which is nice. So
Nice.
yeah.
Um, so with the whole storage, like obviously you need to have enough storage space and bandwidth when the festival's running and everything like that. But like,
Mm-hmm.
do you guys keep? Like, do you keep anything, or does it get like purged after each festival? Like, how does that all? Like, do you have an ever growing?
Well, it's interesting that we for the films, no, and the main reason for the films is
Still
that
no.
once the key expires on encrypted content, there's nothing you
It
can
might
really
as
do
well be
unless
garbage
unless you order
anyway.
another
Yeah.
key. Yeah, and so there's no real need for retention on that end. However, there's other areas for storage that are critical in the sense that content capture and a lot of the we do a ton of filming, publicity, that kind of thing during the festival, and a lot of that content has to get sort of retained over the years. So that's another sort of storage challenge with that. I think with the films themselves, though, it's really just the enormous bottleneck that happens in late August, right? Because you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of films suddenly come in. So year round, we're fine, right? There's usually on a playout server, for example, there's about 3.3 terabytes of onboard storage. So it's not a lot, but the whole idea is that you're showing 4 or 5 movies or 6 movies or something, and then movie's done, delete it, put the new one on, kind of thing. The challenge with larger film festivals, though, is that doesn't come anywhere close to satisfying an 11-day festival with the number of films are showing, even in one cinema, right?
Yeah.
So the whole necessity of having that redundant library server becomes that much more critical. So I think we have 30 something terabytes. I'm trying to think on the library server we have locally. And then, we sort of scale it up based on the needs for the festival. The large venues don't do a lot of screening, so their use is less like storage than redundancy and sort of having that fail safe, right? Because you have a 2,500 seat venue doing a world premiere gala, you want to make sure that you have a fallback in case something happens, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. But in venues like the large multiplexes, and this is something other festivals, large festivals encounter as well, is that you have like 14 plus or whatever dozens of screens essentially that you're managing in one venue. That storage management becomes really critical. And the bandwidth also becomes critical, right? Because you can only, you can store a lot of stuff. You can only push so much stuff to another server at any one
the
time,
pipes
and that's
limit everything. Yeah.
exactly. And so when you're limited in the pipes, that becomes another bottleneck. And the current playout servers or the industry standard playout servers, they don't have like 10 gig, 30 gig, 50 gig. They don't have these SFPs or these ports that can do a ton of content push, and they also have onboard SSDs that are going to be limited based on how much they can write. So there's certain bottlenecks that necessitate just really good planning.
Yep.
Right. So in other words, you're done a screening at 3 o'clock, and then you've deleted that film, and then therefore later at 8 o'clock you're going to start migrating or moving content over. On a network side, the nice thing about the servers is that they have 3 NICs, and so typically the primary NIC is just for the local auditorium connection, so you can play out and talk to the projector and whatnot. And then the secondary NIC or the third NIC is for content management, so you can actually pushing content right into the drive, so it doesn't interrupt commands and controls that are for the actual playout of the server itself. So from a design point of view, it's absolutely there. It does have sort of some future proofing measures. I think if there's going to be a larger amount of traffic pushed over. The weird thing though is that for an average cinema, this is not a problem. This is really a problem for a film festival.
Yeah,
right?
because of the burstiness of it. Yeah, which actually leads me to the question of the planning. Like you said, good planning. So the festival's that much time. Like how long before the festival does the like it all start?
I think with ours we have 3 other large scale gala venues that we have to start building out. That could start anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks out from the festival itself. And then we have the multiplex up the street, which we may get access another couple weeks ahead of the festival kind of thing. So you're realistically looking at a 3-week buffer. Now our headquarters we use year round, so that's not a challenge to load and get content in. But that being said, films are going to start arriving in August.
Okay.
Typically, they might be a little ahead, but there's a whole print traffic management system that goes in with that. So it's not like they just come right away. We start ingesting them. There's a whole sort of labeling, and so think of it like an inventory management system that has to happen over hundreds of films. So that process takes place, and then it migrates to the booth, and then we start doing ingests and validations. And so, it's really, I would say, a 2.5 week crunch before festival time to make sure that we're on top of everything that's coming in and ensuring the validity of that in there, right? And then it's we have people dedicated full time really just for content management, right? It's for film management of just knowing when can we push things over to the server, what are we allowed to delete, right? And that's the other thing, when there's a lot of screenings being jumbled and moved around, the ability to delete content reliably and not have to worry that you're going to jeopardize the screening is quite a challenge in itself. But yeah, I would say that's sort of like the crunch time is the 2 to 3 week period is when we really start sort of ramping up and pushing the servers to the limits that we at least put them under. So yeah.
Cool. Going back to when you were talking about DCP and quality control and validation and everything like that, is there been any cases of, like, I don't know, people who've last minute, I don't know, kind of like war stories of having to scrambles to fix something last second because someone gave bad, or do you guys get started early enough in the system that you kind of iron all that out? Because where I'm getting at is, I guess it's as good as the people giving it to you, right? So if they
Correct.
take last minute to give it to you, then yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is with cinema, it's an industry of standards, right? So the idea is that I always compare it closer to book publishing because,
cool.
someone makes a film and they do the post-production facility. Everybody should have the same experience of that film, assuming that your cinema has been calibrated properly, you followed all the rules, right? So it's not like a rock show or a theater where everything's sort of done according to
live,
the show is. Yeah. So on that note, the one thing that we definitely encounter, and I think any sort of large festival would encounter, is that you're going to get a lot of films from very big studios, and those are fine, right? Like, they have the money, they have the infrastructure, they're going to be fine. But you're getting a lot of films from all over the world, first-time filmmakers, people who don't have the same financial resources as others, and so therefore, what we call them is homebrew DCPs. And the homebrew DCP is going to be someone's going to make because they'll think, oh, I can make it at home, and you can convert your film to a DCP, and if you do it properly, there should be no issues. But the big challenge usually is, not following the rules or not having a good understanding of the rules, and so you end up running into problems on that end. And so with the digital format, it's a little, like I said, it's very rigid, right? So when we receive content, you less likely to have something that goes up and then something's technically wrong with it, but it would have sort of flagged that in advance. However, you can have false positives. So by that I mean someone can do everything right with making their film and making the digital version of their film, but something is wrong critically with the audio or the picture, and that wouldn't be determined until you see it on screen. So there is an entire inspection process that actually takes place with TIFF as well. So any of the films coming in go in for a visual inspection. Now, that doesn't mean they're watching everything from start to end. It's more of like, scanning through and sort of doing a spot check of it. But that sort of part is critical because, like I said, someone can do everything right, and maybe the color space is totally off and everyone looks, like neon green, or for example, right? So there's all these little sort of problems that could arise despite someone seemingly doing everything like properly. Audio mixes can be done incorrectly. A lot of these sort of, details sort of pop up. And then the other challenge too is that we have a whole industry component of the festival where people are essentially pitching films to get bought. And for that, it's even more of a Wild West in the sense of, people who don't necessarily get accepted at the festival, but they want to be able to take advantage of. We have hundreds of industry professionals there who could buy their movies and sell them in their regions. And so that's even more of sort of a Wild West of getting everything under the sun. And yeah, it may not work. And it's a lot of people, a lot of post-production houses that claim that they will do it properly and they don't. And then, filmmaker learns the hard way that they just spend a bunch of money on someone who doesn't know how to make their film properly. It's been an interesting transition because historically, before the digital version, if someone wanted to get a film in the first in sorry any cinema, you have to print the film,
Yeah.
print the 35. You can't do that at home, right? So you would go to a lab, they would do it for you, and everything would be fine. And I think the advent of digital has been good in the sense that now people can do it at home,
Yep.
but the downside is that people can do it at home and they can do
Yeah.
it wrong. Yeah, so that's yeah. So there's definitely been like horror stories of things arriving very late, not working, or I think the thing that I've seen sort of the worst versions of is a film that had that sort of false positive and everything was seemed to be okay, and you're playing it out, and if it wasn't gone through inspection, the audio starts drifting out of sync. So everything is fine the first 10 minutes, last 30 minutes could be like 2-3 seconds off, and it becomes unwatchable. So again, the inspection process eliminates that problem, but I've seen at other festivals that exact issue arise, and it's painful because imagine sitting in a room with 400 people and then all of a sudden your movie just sort of is unwatchable and you don't know it from the first 10 minutes. So yeah, so there's a lot of that that becomes a very big challenge. So yeah.
Cool. So back to like the kind of busy time and then some free time. Then so you've got your infrastructure. You've got the light box. Was that
Yep,
what it was?
Lightbox is the headquarters. Yeah.
So infrastructure, whether it's storage server, networking, or anything, like how often do you guys upgrade stuff? And like, do you use the quiet times of the years to kind of do your maintenance windows, or how does that kind of flow?
Yeah, we do take advantage of the maintenance windows where we get them, because in addition to doing a lot of the screenings, we do a ton of huge events as well. And the other sort of area of the event side of things is that content management storage, the sort of the upgrades are critical to keep the act going. So the Lightbox in particular is a huge broadcast infrastructure for doing live broadcast events. So in other words, we'll have like an onstage conversation between an actor or filmmaker and one of our programmers, and we'll do a multi-camera cut, and then we'll broadcast that out, and we might have clips and other things to it. So a lot of the content for a lot of these events, we don't just throw it on a thumb drive and put it on a computer. We need to have a sort of management system and a retention for that, similar to what we do for the digital cinema stuff for the festival. But yeah, no, definitely looking at year round, looking at network upgrades for, like I said earlier, a lot of the AV is all moving network based, right? So a lot of video transmission, audio, like our entire audio processing system in the Lightbox is all digital as well, right? So it's incredibly contingent on the reliability of the network switches and the interconnectivity of all those switches and the redundancy of that. So a lot of work goes into setting that up and making sure that we have a measure of redundancy that can work on sort of that end. A lot of cabling infrastructure between sort of the booth. Like at Lightbox, it's nice because the booth is relatively centralized between the 6 cinemas. And so, it's easy to sort of cable and branch out, and we have sort of fail safes if something goes wrong. But still, every cinema has its own Cisco switch, its own redundant switch for, we have Netgear M4230s for all the audio distribution and control for the AV side of things. All the AV is air gapped from the corporate network, so it's like there's multiple levels of sort of redundancy and operations on that end. One thing we've also had to deploy with a lot of the cinema playout is PTB V2 and V1 clocks that are able to keep everything in time, because on the AV side that is absolutely critical, and that's something that's available on a lot of the edge switches and stuff as well. So yeah, the networking side has exploded, and it's just in the sense of ensuring the sort of the reliability of that, because otherwise audio will go down, control will go down. It's like, yeah, the days of sort of the analog film we still show a lot, but if you want audio to go from the analog film in the room, you're relying on a digital process. So it's a lot of upgrades yearly that we're doing just to sort of keep at pace with everything. Cool. So yeah. And
how do you deal with, like, am I right to say when you get different like during the festival you've got multiple venues? They're not TIFF's venues. You're like renting someone else's out. How do you handle maybe differing IT gear than what you thought you were going to get or something like that? Like, is there any kind of like agreement of standard between you guys?
the easy solution is that we just build out our own and we put
Nice.
it in place. So yeah, so what I've done for the large venues and for the multiplex is that I have quite literally a rolling rack. So one of the studios that we have at the Lightbox is it's our production studio. It's also sort of a year-round staging area for all the gear that we deploy at the large venues. So all of the processing, the network, all that stuff, it's in a rolling rack, and it has sort of patches and patch bays on the front, on the back. And the idea is that we roll it in. We'll get a public internet connection, obviously, from the venue.
Yeah.
But all the VLAN infrastructure programmed within the switches is that so that, cinema gear gets plugged in here, live event gear gets plugged in there, and then we're trunked out to their public internet, which allows us to, do remote management. Because during the festival, the other thing that's critical is me and one other person have remote connections to all of the large venue sites, including the multiplex, for the ideas that troubleshooting, right? Yeah. So if there's server issues, projector issues, key management, content issues, everything is sort of centralized that I can reach out to all of those local rolling racks remotely, and I don't have to worry about someone else's network infrastructure aside from just having a reliable public internet connection, right? So outside of that, everything is handled, which is also critical because when it comes to the cinema side of things, we'll have the playout server, the management server, and the projector. They're all going to be on the same VLAN, and they have to be sort of the only things talking to each other in order to put the show on, right? So making sure that we essentially provide that network gear to sort of separate church and state from that's essential in order to make sure everything works properly. So
you guys move in and take over for a little bit.
Basically, I mean, we build out the whole cinemas with all the equipment on that end, but from a booth infrastructure with the networking side, absolutely. And once we saw sort of the digital age on encroaching, and that was going to be a thing, that was something we leaned into quite early. So it's nice because then every year I revisit the same racks and go, oh, I'd modify this, I might upgrade that, I might put a different switch, I might add more, change the VLAN structure, but it's something I do year round. So that when there is that 2-week crunch to get everything sort of deployed at the large venue, we're just rolling the rack in, and then I power it on, and everything's sort of good to go. So it's made it a lot. It's like a touring rock show in a way, right? You just kind of roll the stuff in, plug it in, and everything's already configured on your end. So yeah.
Nice, cool. More on the people, process, human side, I guess, is just about TIFF. Like how between your team of like kind of the tech and hardware and like the IT squad that runs the whole thing, like how many people do you have working on this?
Good question. So from the IT team, who they handle a ton, it's a lot of staff management. So in other words, we have a staff of I think a couple hundred year round, and then we go up to 500 around festival time. And so we have an IT team which I think has 6 or 7 people. They're like year round, including like a network sysadmin, and they manage the building corporate network, any network requirements that would happen at a industry session setups that would be external, that kind of thing. And then ticketing, which is huge, obviously, for the remote sites. So they're building out they're dropping network switches and setting up all of that at the other venues. From the tech side of things, we bring in more people for the technical sort of oversight and management, but it's mostly for like projectionists. So when I said people running the films, we have something called tech reps, which are representatives inside the cinemas to meet with the filmmakers and then liaise with the projectionists and that kind of thing. Okay. And we have people managing ingests, right? So like managing loading the films and the key deployments. And so there's probably another half a dozen people, I would say, deployed to that. And then for the sort of the oversight, there's me. So I would be probably considered more like the head engineer side of things. So to take care of that, we also have another technical manager who he manages, a lot of the staffing for other venues and projectionists and making sure the logistics of how things go in. And then we bring in another couple people in order to help again with the overall logistics of just building out those spaces, mainly because it's such a huge undertaking in such a short amount of time. Right. So it's so it's a big branch. And then during the the festival, we have a lot of those people moving around between the different venues, and my role is sort of, I'm kind of damage control. So I stay usually in the same position because I can remotely access anything if something goes wrong, but then I can physically go on site because all of our venues now are within about a 4-minute walking distance from the Lightbox. So I'm also sort of like the guy that just runs in the back of the building to fix the thing if something goes wrong. So during festivals. So yeah, so it's an interesting dynamic. It's I think one of the challenges that, like I said earlier, there's not a lot of cinema technicians that work on an engineering level with a lot of network stuff. So there's, the IT people couldn't necessarily help with the cinema gear, right? But like the cinema people couldn't, like I couldn't do a lot of the VLAN programming necessarily on the switches. I'm relying on someone on the IT team to help me with that. But then, a lot of the networking infrastructure, the peculiarities of or particulars of the playout servers that's something I would have to be responsible for, right? So it's definitely a weird overlap that would happen in the last 5 years because it's not very, IT does this, tech does this. It's kind of like merged in a way. So
yeah. That's cool. And there's a lot of parallels to like my world of just like data storage, enterprise, all that whole IT software dev world have now kind of become this thing called DevOps, and it's all the same thing now just because the world's moving so fast. Anyway, it's interesting.
Yeah, and I think for our end, because we're doing a lot of live events and a lot of video and audio transmission, like I said, now is all digital. It's all IP based. It's not typical video transmission paths that you'd have in the past. So a lot of that infrastructure. So we do a lot of live streams, for example, and so the remote management of the live streams that we're doing for full remote productions at a large venue would also be managed sort of by me on the back end. So it's a lot of that sort of technical elements have sort of fallen into the position. Right? So, like I said, I used to be a cinema technician. I'm kind of half now. So
that's cool. So, yeah. Which that's cool because that leads me to some questions I want to ask about like looking forward because fast moving tech hits everyone's world. It's really seemed to hit the media entertainment world. They almost seem to get affected first. I don't know because maybe it's because it's the thing that we want to consume the most of.
Yes.
But so are you seeing more demand from filmmakers or distributors to receive content back from you digitally after screening rather than shipping drives back? Like,
a huge move has happened where even though we asked for physical backups of the films just for redundancy's sake, digital transport of films has absolutely taken over. So one of the things that's happened across Ontario, I don't know if it's probably elsewhere, is that a lot of distributors have now offered to provide essentially FTP servers, like the hardware for it, at venues. So in other words, the mom and pause screening room up in the middle of rural Ontario now would have a box that lives in their rack and it's connected to the public internet. It has another NIC that's connected to their local network for the cinema server. And so they would remotely upload films. And then the person
like
at the
little
venue,
staging area, and then they could pull it off there.
And then they just pull it off from there. So we have the same thing. So the labs have done this as well. There's different sort of iterations and flavors of it. I would see that as, we're downloading a lot of films from, encrypted portals and sort of other sort of FTP sites and that kind of thing. But in general, that is definitely where things have moved. And for the most part, it's fine. There's sort of the peculiarities of there's like a Sparalinks and sort of like more reliable transport methods for that have fail safes and redundancies. So if you downloaded everything properly, and then we have a lot of people doing something they'll upload through Google Drive, and that's a bit of for digital cinema stuff, it's actually a bit of a mess just because of how they sort of index and categorize certain files when they compress. Exactly, right? So that becomes a problem in of itself. But the digital transport, absolutely. And I think one of the things moving forward is looking at hosting, more localized servers where filmmakers upload content. So there's services that we use for that right now, but that would be something that I think is going to be far more prevalent. I don't think we're ever going to get to the point where, things are streamed. I know I get asked at that a lot. Right? Like, will the films be streamed local to the cinemas? I don't think so. And it's just, there's too much risk for that. But, moving the films digitally has absolutely taken over because it's far cheaper to do that than it is to, ship a drive, in other words, right? So, yeah. So
Makes sense. All right, now moving on to the magic question you have to ask no matter what about AI, right? So
oh yeah,
AI is interesting, especially in the creative worlds, because it's on one side really, really useful, efficient tool for improving workflows, but on the same side,
yep,
if used in the wrong way, defeats the
yep,
best part of making things, creativity.
yes,
So
right.
I can imagine in your industries where you kind of have foot on both sides of those things.
Mhm.
How do you see AI touching that world? Media management, metadata, anywhere else in the
Yeah,
pipeline? Are you guys using any? What's your personal thoughts? I don't know. Tell me.
yeah. I mean, personally, sort of working in the entertainment industry and seeing sort of like the how creative people sort of interact with AI. It's I don't have a positive opinion of that on that end. There's a lot of people that have a very similar opinion in my sort of industry as seeing it more of a threat than an asset.
Yep.
On the exhibition side, it doesn't really impact too much. So like personally, from a technician who's doing exhibition, it doesn't really impact. It certainly doesn't impact 35 millimeter and 70 mil films. That's sort of the one area it's still going to be,
Yeah.
so it's never going to touch. But yeah, no, I think AI is, it's definitely here. There's certain, I think logistical probably advantages that it has in sort of operating and managing things. But I think for most of our sort of workflows, it doesn't sort of add anything. And in fact, I think the one thing that sort of worries us is that develop such a good workflow with the like how people are deployed to manage redundancies within the tech department. It's like I'd feel worried about relying on even something that maybe is quite reliable from an AI point of view to give me a positive sense that we're okay, rather than having maybe two or three people that have overlooked the same information that said yes, we're good, right? Because then, like I said, in a film festival context, there's zero downtime.
Yep.
So to rely on maybe something that says, yeah, you should be fine, and then
And then
you're
it's
not.
gone. Yeah.
It's a huge consequence versus relying on experience and expertise, I would say. So
Cool.
yeah,
I love that answer because that's the right answer. And everything with all these new technologies is like, well, it's new and it's awesome. You have to use it everywhere. And you're like, not
yeah,
necessarily. It's just another
no,
tool that could solve a problem. And then
correct.
just on the other
Yeah,
side, where it's just like, it's evil and wrong because I'm scared of it, it was like, well, not necessarily. But with that said, I do agree with you. And it's for anyone who it's there as an assistant for us, maybe to make things more efficient, but like never let it
yeah,
think and create for us. That's our job. That's our unique things as humans. So I like
yeah. I
that.
mean, like one thing that it's not necessarily AI, but like I do deploy a rather extensive SNMP management system on the back end for all of the hardware that we deploy for festivals. So I get technical alerts when projector three's fan is going low below a certain RPM. I'll get an alert or something. So looking at potential uses that could benefit that to give you more quick access for feedback of problems that could impact a screening. Absolutely. But
Cool. Yeah.
outside of that, I don't
And
know.
also that too, where we just call it the world calls it all AI, not AI now, and it's just like, well, it's automation. Like they kind of
Correct.
bridge the
Yeah.
whole thing together anyway. But
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
interesting, yeah. And actually, okay, yeah. So we were talking about DCP and all that and quality. If you could change one thing about how the industry handles digital film delivery and storage standards, what would
hmm
it be?
Oh man. I would almost have to lean on like a standardization of delivery. I think like one of the things that's a bit frustrating when you're on the exhibitor end or at like a large film festival end is that because you have hundreds of different filmmakers all using sort of different portals and flavors and things to get the films to you, you know you end up having a standard in DCP, which extends exhibition to delivery to how like things are sort of compressed and packed and that, and then they're sort of delivered by any means necessary. And I think one of the things that worries me is not having a better standard for that.
Okay.
Because I've seen the dangers of physical delivery. The best one of all time was this one film festival that they delivered their film on a thumb drive, probably less than half the size of my thumb, inside of a ring case. And then when the technician opened up the ring case, it popped out and it came within probably 2 centimeters of falling down a drain.
Ah.
And so it's one of those moments of like, this is your film. This is like,
And I bet they were like, "Oh, this will be so cute." It's like,
yes,
yeah,
of course.
yeah,
Yeah. And then I would say on the other side of it, from the digital delivery, it's just really, like you have to sign up for this portal. You need this app. You need to do, so you think of it for someone who works in a closed workflow in an organization, they're probably just downloading the one app or they just use the one thing. But if you're dealing with hundreds of films, like there's been some festivals I've worked where I've had to have like 6 or 7 different apps downloaded on the PC I'm using just to manage all the content coming in. And it gets a little frustrating.
Yeah.
It's also, from a network point of view, kind of stresses out the system in here because certain programs definitely eat up the bandwidth more than others, right? So they're able to sort of say, oh, I'm gonna like a Sparalinks are sort of good in that way for being very fast, but can be notorious for just becoming network hogs very quickly. So it's like there's certain other things I think that would be great to standardize that, so films move in a more consistent fashion. And the better expectation, we've had issues where they're like, oh, we're going to send you the film today, plays in 2 days, and it takes 26 hours to download because there's some bottleneck on the upload end. Or, you know what I mean? Like there's this sort of sense of it's online, you can download, you're fine. And it's like, well, not so much.
I don't know where it is online. Yeah.
Correct, exactly. Yeah, so that's the other danger. So, yeah.
Cool. Thank you. That was a great answer. And I guess with that, we'll wrap up with a simple thank you for joining us. I guess you've still got when's the next September 10th?
September. Oh God, what's this?
Anyway, September. It's in September.
It's September. I kind of it's a bit foggy for me until it happens.
Yeah, it's just he's like, I don't want to think about that yet. I'm still Anyway, exactly, yeah. Awesome. So anyway, thank you so much for your spending your time with us and your very, very thoughtful answers. I learned a lot about. I don't know, just like how it runs behind the scenes. So I appreciated it, and I know a lot others will. So
no, happy to be part of it, and thanks for inviting me on. So yeah,
perfect. All right, so with that, that's what's spinning. All right,
thanks so much.